Imagine booking a first-class seat only to be told without reason that you don't belong there. A woman, a lawyer, a fighter, Naomi Sinclair was about to take the flight of her life, but what started as a routine trip quickly spiraled into a battle of power, prejudice, and one woman's refusal to back down. The real question is, when the system is against you, how do you fight back? Stay with us, because this is a story you won't forget. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The morning sun peeked through the towering glass windows of JFK Airport, casting golden streaks across the polished floors. Naomi Sinclair adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase as she walked toward the Silver Horizon Airlines check-in counter. She was used to airports, used to the stairs, and used to the quiet assessments people made the moment they saw her. A tall black woman with striking red hair, walking with the kind of confidence that made some people uncomfortable. Her flight to Los Angeles wasn't just another business trip. She was heading to one of the biggest labor rights conferences in the country, where she'd be speaking on workplace discrimination and gender inequality. Years of fighting for others had led her here. She approached the counter, offering her ID and ticket with a polite nod. The agent, a young woman in a crisp navy uniform, glanced at the screen, then at Naomi, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. "One moment," she said, forcing a neutral smile before stepping away to whisper something to her colleague. Naomi exhaled through her nose. It wasn't the first time. When the agent returned, her smile was wider, but strained. "Everything looks good, Ms. Sinclair. You're all set for boarding. Gate 23A. "Thank you," Naomi said, grabbing her boarding pass. She made her way toward the VIP lounge, adjusting the tailored blazer draped over her arm. The space was quiet, filled with the low murmur of business travelers tapping away on laptops. A waiter in a sharp vest moved gracefully between the guests, refilling drinks with seamless efficiency. Naomi settled into a chair near the window, stretching her legs as she reached for the menu. It took 10 minutes before anyone approached her. She noticed the waiter tending to other guests first, offering drinks, chatting warmly. When he finally turned to her, his expression lacked the ease he'd had with the others. "Would you like something to drink?" His voice was polite but mechanical. "A glass of sparkling water, please." The waiter hesitated. "I'll check if we have that," he said before walking off. Naomi smirked, shaking her head. Across the lounge, a man in an expensive gray suit waved the same waiter over. "Champagne, please," he said smoothly. Without hesitation, the waiter nodded. "Right away, sir." Naomi leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming against the leather armrest. It was always subtle, never overt. A longer wait, a question of legitimacy, an assumption that she didn't quite belong. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from an unknown number flashed across the screen. "No matter what you say at that conference, nothing will change. Save your breath." Naomi read the message twice, her pulse quickening. Anonymous threats weren't new to her line of work, but they never failed to remind her of the stakes. She stared at the words for a moment before locking her phone and tucking it into her bag. This trip was bigger than her. It always had been. The boarding process was seamless, but Naomi sensed the shift the moment she stepped onto the aircraft. The crew moved efficiently, guiding passengers to their seats with rehearsed smiles. But there was something in the way the lead flight attendant, her name tag read Celeste Donovan, watched her. Celeste was striking, with high cheekbones, sleek blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, and a posture that spoke of effortless authority. She greeted each passenger with a cool politeness, but when Naomi reached her, the warmth in Celeste's expression flickered, just for a second. "Good afternoon," Naomi said, maintaining eye contact. Celeste tilted her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over Naomi's blazer, her expensive carry-on. Then, with a smile too sharp to be genuine, she stepped aside. "Welcome aboard, Miss Sinclair." Naomi walked past without another word, settling into her first-class seat. The cabin was spacious, designed for comfort, but something about Celeste's presence put her on edge. She reached for the in-flight menu, just as an older white man slid into the seat beside her. His suit was crisp, his cologne sharp. He barely glanced at her before tossing his leather briefcase onto the shared armrest. Moments later, Celeste appeared at Naomi's side, her smile fixed in place. I'm sorry, Ms. Sinclair, but there seems to be a seating issue. Naomi blinked. A seating issue? Celeste gestured toward the man beside her. Mr. Gallagher was supposed to be assigned this seat, but there appears to have been a mix-up. We'd like to accommodate you elsewhere. Naomi's fingers tightened around the menu. My ticket says 3A, she said, voice even. Celeste's smile didn't falter. Yes, but sometimes these things happen. We have an available seat in premium economy. Naomi cut her off. I'm not moving. A flicker of irritation passed over Celeste's face, so quick that most wouldn't have caught it, but Naomi did. I understand your frustration, Celeste said, voice saccharine. But Mr. Gallagher is a longtime client with our airline, and I'm a paying customer just like he is, Naomi interrupted, and I'm not giving up my seat. Mr. Gallagher finally looked up from his phone, frowning. This isn't a big deal. Just let the lady sit somewhere else, he muttered. Naomi turned toward him. This lady paid for this seat just like you did. Celeste's expression tightened. Jared Whitman, a passenger sitting a row behind, shifted in his seat. His journalist instincts kicked in, eyes narrowing as he observed the exchange. Celeste inhaled sharply before nodding. Very well, she said. She turned and walked away, but Naomi knew this wasn't over. Minutes later, a different flight attendant passed by, serving drinks. Naomi watched as the passengers in first class were offered their choice of beverages: wine, champagne, sparkling water. When the attendant reached Naomi, she hesitated. Would you like anything to drink? Sparkling water, please. The attendant gave a strained smile. We'll begin full service shortly. Naomi exhaled slowly. A few seats away, Jared reached for his phone and started recording. This flight had just become something much bigger than a trip to Los Angeles. The hum of the aircraft filled the cabin, blending with the soft clinking of glassware as flight attendants moved effortlessly through first class, serving drinks. Naomi leaned back in her seat, staring straight ahead, jaw tight. She had flown enough times to recognize the pattern. Subtle, calculated, designed to make her feel like she didn't belong. Across the aisle, a woman in a pearl necklace and navy cardigan received her glass of wine with a smile. The flight attendant poured it with careful precision, nodding warmly before moving on. Naomi had yet to be served. She caught sight of Celeste near the galley, speaking to another flight attendant. Their conversation was hushed, but the quick glance Celeste shot in Naomi's direction wasn't lost on her. Excuse me, Naomi said, keeping her voice controlled. The same flight attendant who had ignored her earlier turned back, her expression neutral. I'd like that sparkling water now. The woman hesitated before nodding. I'll check on that for you. Naomi exhaled through her nose, tapping her fingers against the armrest. Across from her, Jared Whitman leaned forward slightly, arms crossed. You travel often? His voice was casual, but his eyes held a sharpness that suggested he had already formed an opinion about what was happening. More than I'd like, Naomi said. Jared smirked. Let me guess. This isn't the first time something like this has happened? Naomi studied him, debating whether to entertain the conversation. He had the look of a man who asked questions for a living, observant, slightly amused but clearly watching. She shrugged. It's never the first time. Before Jared could respond, Celeste strode down the aisle, pausing at Naomi's row. Ms. Sinclair, I just wanted to check in and see if everything is to your satisfaction, she said, voice perfectly even. Naomi met her gaze, noting the careful way Celeste held herself, controlled, measured. You could start by serving me the drink I asked for half an hour ago. Celeste's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'll take care of that personally. She turned and disappeared toward the galley. Naomi knew she had just made an enemy. Jared let out a low whistle. She doesn't like you much, does she? Naomi let out a humorless laugh. No, she doesn't. Jared sat back, watching as Celeste returned moments later with a crystal glass of sparkling water. She placed it on Naomi's tray with an exaggerated air of politeness. There you go, Miss Sinclair, Celeste said smoothly. I do apologize for the delay. Naomi lifted the glass, tilting it slightly. You always make your passengers wait this long? Celeste's smile sharpened. Only the difficult ones. Jared let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Naomi didn't react. She simply lifted the glass to her lips and took a slow sip. eyes never leaving Celeste's. The flight attendant held her gaze for a second too long before finally stepping away. This wasn't just about a drink. This was about power, and Naomi had just refused to yield. An hour into the flight, the tension in the cabin remained thick, lingering beneath the surface of forced politeness. Naomi had tried to ignore it, had focused on reviewing her speech for the conference, but the air felt heavy, charged. She wasn't paranoid. She knew when something was coming. The moment arrived when a man in business attire, mid-50s, silver hair, expensive wristwatch, leaned over the aisle, shifting into Naomi's space. "Excuse me, miss," he said, voice deep, condescending. "I believe you're in my seat." Naomi turned her head slowly, brows lifting. "I don't think so." The man exhaled through his nose, clearly irritated. "I have 3A on my ticket." Jared sat up straighter in his seat, watching. Naomi set her tablet aside and pulled out her boarding pass, holding it up between them. "So do I." The man frowned, glancing between her ticket and his own before looking up at Celeste, who had conveniently arrived at the scene. "Ms. Donovan," the man said smoothly, "there's been a mix-up with the seats." Celeste's lips curled into something smug. "Oh dear," she said, tilting her head as if this was an unfortunate inconvenience. "I do apologize, Mr. Gallagher. Let me see how we can fix this." Naomi already knew what was coming. Celeste turned to her, feigning concern. "Ms. Sinclair, would you mind moving to accommodate Mr. Gallagher? I understand this is frustrating, but we have an open seat in premium economy." "No!" Celeste blinked as if surprised. "I understand your frustration, but Mr. Gallagher is a valued client, and—" "I don't care," Naomi interrupted, voice steady. "I paid for this seat. I'm not moving." A ripple of quiet murmurs spread through the cabin. Jared leaned closer, voice low. "You sure you don't want me to start recording?" Naomi didn't answer. Celeste's expression remained neutral, but her fingers curled tightly around her clipboard. "Of course," she said smoothly, "we wouldn't want to cause a disruption." She turned back to Mr. Gallagher. "It seems there was an error. Let me find another arrangement for you." Mr. Gallagher huffed but nodded, moving toward a seat further back. Celeste lingered, her eyes locked onto Naomi's. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Sinclair," she said, voice sweet with venom. Then she walked away. Naomi exhaled, glancing at Jared, who shook his head. "That was bold," he said. "She's not going to let that slide." Naomi leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "I know." And sure enough, Celeste wasn't done. Minutes later, Naomi noticed her speaking in hushed tones with another flight attendant. Then, ever so subtly, Celeste lifted the intercom phone and murmured something. Naomi's stomach tightened. Moments later, the voice of the pilot came over the speakers. "Passengers, please remain seated. We will be addressing a minor issue with seating arrangements shortly. Thank you for your patience." Naomi clenched her fists. Celeste wasn't playing fair. She was setting a trap, and Naomi had just walked right into it. The low murmur of the captain's announcement barely faded before Naomi felt the weight of the moment settle on her chest. She knew what was happening. She had seen it before, read about it in case files, watched it unfold in news stories. This was how it started. A minor issue, a misunderstanding, an uncooperative passenger, and then suddenly security would be waiting when the plane landed, hands resting just close enough to their weapons to send a message. She swallowed against the tightness in her throat, forcing herself to stay still as Celeste moved past, her demeanor calm, her expression unreadable. Jared, beside her, let out a slow exhale. "She's setting you up." Naomi didn't answer right away. Her mind was already working through her options. "I know," she said finally. Across the aisle, a woman in her 50s, Laura Everett, Naomi recalled from the flight manifest, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had been silent so far, but now she leaned toward Celeste as she passed. "Excuse me," Laura said. "Is something wrong?" Celeste gave her a smooth, reassuring smile. "Oh, not at all, Mrs. Everett. Just ensuring all passengers are comfortable." Naomi didn't miss the way Celeste's hand gripped the edge of her tray table as she spoke, her knuckles slightly tensed. A practiced lie. Naomi turned her gaze to Jared. "How much of that did you get?" Jared tapped his phone screen, showing the recording icon still glowing red. "All of it." A flicker of relief passed through Naomi, but it was short-lived. She knew Celeste wasn't the kind of person who let things go. She was the kind who tightened the screws until something snapped. Naomi just had to make sure it wasn't her. It happened fast. One moment, the flight continued as usual, attendants refilling drinks, the occasional overhead chime, the steady hum of conversation. Then in a single well-timed motion, Celeste made her move. A flight attendant passed Naomi's row, holding a tray of beverages. As she did, she stumbled, just enough to jostle the tray, sending a glass of water tumbling into Naomi's lap. The cold splash shocked her system, her hands instinctively jerking away. She barely had time to register it before Celeste was there, hovering like a vulture. "Oh dear," Celeste said, voice full of mock concern. "Are you all right, Miss Sinclair?" Naomi's patience, already stretched thin, were dangerously close to snapping. "I'm fine," she said, voice controlled. "Accidents happen." Celeste tilted her head. "Of course. But you seem tense." Naomi stiffened. She knew what Celeste was doing. If she so much as raised her voice, if she expressed even the smallest amount of frustration, Celeste would use it as an excuse. "Maybe you should move to another seat while we get that cleaned up," Celeste suggested smoothly. "I'd hate for you to be uncomfortable." Jared's voice cut in before Naomi could respond. "That's funny," he said, tone light but sharp. "A minute ago, she was too difficult to accommodate, but now you're concerned about her comfort." Celeste's jaw tensed. Naomi set her hands on the armrests, grounding herself. "I don't need another seat," she said. "I need a towel." Celeste didn't answer right away. She was weighing her options, deciding if this was the moment to strike. Then ever so slightly she smiled. "As you wish," she said, stepping back. Naomi exhaled, barely releasing the breath before Jared leaned in. "That wasn't random," he said quietly. "No," Naomi agreed. "It wasn't." She glanced around the cabin, noting the subtle shift in atmosphere. Some passengers had picked up on the tension, eyes flicking between her and Celeste. And that was the goal, wasn't it? To make her look like a problem. She wasn't going to give them what they wanted, but she also wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Naomi dabbed at the damp fabric of her pants with the napkin Jared handed her. Jaw tight, pulse steady. She refused to let Celeste see her frustration, refused to let this moment become what the flight attendant clearly wanted. A scene. Jared kept his phone angled slightly downward, recording everything without drawing attention. His expression was unreadable, but Naomi could tell he was waiting, ready for the moment when things escalated beyond plausible deniability. Celeste didn't walk far. She lingered near the front of the first-class cabin, speaking in hushed tones to another flight attendant, her posture just a little too calculated. Naomi could see it now, the way Celeste moved, the way she spoke. She had done this before, maybe not to Naomi specifically, but to someone. She glanced to her right and found Laura Everett still watching, her expression somewhere between discomfort and curiosity. "Mrs. Everett," Naomi said, keeping her voice low but steady. "You've flown with this airline before, haven't you?" Laura blinked at the sudden question but nodded. "Yes, many times." Naomi didn't look away from Celeste. "Have you ever seen something like this?" A pause, then, hesitantly, Laura replied, "Not exactly." That was enough. Not exactly meant she had seen something similar. Naomi was about to say more when Celeste turned back toward her row, her polite smile firmly in place. "Ms. Sinclair," she said sweetly, "the captain has been made aware of the situation, and we want to ensure everyone on board remains comfortable and at ease." The coded language was unmistakable. Naomi lifted her chin. "Good. Then I trust the service will be as attentive as it is for everyone else in first class?" Celeste's smile twitched. "Of course." She turned and walked away. Jared let out a breath, shaking his head. "That was a chess move if I ever saw one." Naomi pressed the napkin harder against her lap. "She's not done," Jared nodded. She's not. The flight continued, tension weaving its way through the atmosphere, invisible but suffocating. Naomi kept her posture poised, her movements measured. She wouldn't give them a single reason to say she was agitated or disruptive. Jared shifted beside her. "How much longer do we have?" Naomi checked the flight tracker on the screen embedded in the seat ahead of her. "Just over an hour." Jared let out a low whistle. Feels longer. Naomi didn't disagree. She lifted her water glass to take a sip. Just as the plane hit a pocket of turbulence, the sudden jolt sent the water sloshing over the rim, splashing onto the tray table and her sleeve. Before she could react, Celeste was there, moving fast, her voice lifting just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Ms. Sinclair," she said, eyes widening in mock alarm, "I'm going to have to ask you to remain calm." Naomi stilled. Jared's grip tightened around his phone. Other passengers turned their heads. The words "remain calm" had done exactly what Celeste intended. Sparked curiosity, concern, quiet judgment. Naomi inhaled slowly. "I am calm," she said, her voice even. Celeste pressed her lips together as if trying to conceal her concern. "It's just that, well, we want to ensure a smooth and pleasant experience for everyone." Naomi saw the trap. If she argued, if she raised her voice even slightly, she would prove Celeste's unspoken accusation correct. Instead, she folded the napkin over her sleeve, dabbing at the water as if Celeste wasn't even there. Jared leaned in, voice low. "That was the move. She just played it." Naomi nodded, keeping her focus on blotting the water from her arm. And then a chime sounded over the speaker system. Celeste turned slightly, speaking into the small receiver clipped to her uniform. "Yes, Captain, I understand. I'll take care of it immediately." She turned back to Naomi, her expression all professionalism, her voice laced with false regret. "I'm sorry, Ms. Sinclair, but due to ongoing concerns, we'll have to ask you to remain in your seat for the remainder of the flight. Any further disruption may result in a security escort upon landing." Silence. Jared's jaw clenched. Naomi's fingers curled into her lap, and Laura Everett, the woman who had said "not exactly," suddenly spoke up. "Excuse me," she said, voice clear. "I've been watching this whole time, and I'd like to know exactly what concerns you're referring to." Naomi turned toward her, surprise flickering through her frustration. Celeste hesitated for the first time. "Mrs. Everett, You what?" Laura's voice carried, crisp and unimpressed. "Because from what I've seen, Ms. Sinclair hasn't done a single thing wrong." A ripple of murmurs passed through the cabin. Celeste's expression remained poised, but her fingers twitched slightly against her clipboard. Naomi exhaled, her grip loosening slightly. The tide was turning, but Celeste still held the power. And Naomi knew this fight wasn't over yet. The air inside the cabin felt heavier now, thick with a tension that had been simmering beneath the surface, but was now unmistakably present. Naomi wasn't the only one who felt it. Laura Everett's words hung between them like an unspoken challenge. For the first time since stepping onto this plane, Naomi saw something flicker behind Celeste's carefully composed mask. Hesitation. Not much, but enough. Celeste turned, forcing a polite smile. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Everett," she said smoothly. "However, I need to ensure that all passengers feel safe and comfortable." There it was again, the unspoken implication, the subtle yet damning suggestion that Naomi was the problem, that her presence was disruptive. Laura folded her arms. "Ms. Sinclair has been nothing but calm. I'd like to know exactly what made you call the captain." Other passengers were watching now, a few exchanging uncertain glances. Some still looked uncomfortable, unsure of whether to engage. But Jared? Jared was laser-focused, still recording, still waiting. Celeste's eyes flicked toward Naomi. "Ms. Sinclair has displayed some resistance toward our flight crew's efforts to accommodate her." Naomi clenched her jaw. Jared let out a soft chuckle. "Yeah, she resisted giving up a seat she paid for. That's not disruptive. That's just common sense." Celeste's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but she quickly regained composure. "I'm simply following protocol." Naomi finally spoke, keeping her voice controlled. "And what protocol is that, exactly?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot like targeted harassment." A murmur rippled through the cabin. A man in a business suit across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, looking between Naomi and Celeste. He was listening now. Others were too. Celeste exhaled slowly, clearly weighing her next move. She turned toward Laura, perhaps hoping to shift the conversation. "I understand this situation may appear unfortunate, but—" "It is unfortunate," Laura interrupted, And it's also unacceptable. Celeste stiffened. Naomi almost smiled. The plane jolted slightly as it hit a small pocket of turbulence, drawing a few nervous glances, but the tension in the cabin had little to do with the air outside. Celeste straightened. "Let's not escalate the situation any further," she said, her voice carefully even. Naomi arched a brow. "Agreed. So how about you stop escalating it?" Another murmur of approval from a few passengers. Celeste's fingers tightened against her clipboard. For the first time, Naomi saw it, the cracks in Celeste's control. She was losing this battle, and she knew it. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Naomi stayed in her seat, keeping her movements deliberate, her expression neutral. She wasn't going to give Celeste any excuse to call for an early landing or have security waiting at the gate, but she knew better than to think Celeste was done. Jared glanced at his phone. "She's regrouping," he murmured, "probably figuring out how to flip this back in her favor." Naomi nodded slightly. "She'll wait for the right moment." The moment came sooner than expected. A flight attendant approached. Not Celeste, but another crew member, younger, with uncertainty written all over her face. She stopped beside Naomi's seat. I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice hesitant. "Would you mind stepping to the galley for a moment? The captain would like to speak with you." Naomi's stomach clenched. Jared frowned. "Since when does the captain need to speak to a passenger mid-flight?" Naomi held the attendant's gaze. "What's this about?" The young woman hesitated. I don't know, ma'am. I was just asked to escort you." It was Celeste. Naomi could see it clear as day. This wasn't protocol. This was a play, a last-ditch effort to isolate her, remove her from the view of the other passengers, and shift control back to Celeste. And it was working. A few passengers were whispering now, stealing glances at Naomi. The optics of this alone were enough to sway those who hadn't been paying attention before. Naomi inhaled slowly, controlling her temper. She turned to the flight attendant. "If the captain wants to speak to me, he can do it right here." The attendant faltered. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "No," Naomi cut in, her voice firm but calm. "I'm staying in my seat." The attendant looked torn, shifting nervously. Naomi glanced toward Celeste. The flight attendant stood near the galley watching, waiting. Her expression was carefully blank, but Naomi knew this was exactly what she had wanted, to make it look like Naomi was refusing to comply. And just like that, Naomi understood. She was being baited. Celeste wanted her to refuse outright, so she could use that refusal against her. Naomi exhaled through her nose and forced a small smile. "I'll tell you what," she said, keeping her voice polite. "Why don't you ask the captain if he'd like to make an announcement over the speaker? That way we can all hear what he has to say." The flight attendant blinked, caught off guard. A few passengers chuckled. Jared grinned. The younger woman faltered, looking over at Celeste, clearly unsure what to do next. Naomi folded her arms, waiting. Celeste, for the first time, looked unsure. The younger flight attendant finally mumbled, "I'll check with him," before turning and disappearing toward the front of the plane. Naomi sat back, exhaling slowly. Jared gave her an approving nod. "That was brilliant." Naomi just shook her head. Celeste had played her strongest card, and Naomi had just called her bluff. But she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had changed. The moment Naomi refused to be lured into Celeste's trap, the tension shifted, not just between them, but among the other passengers. The murmurs had grown louder, the glances more frequent. People were paying attention now, and Celeste knew it. Naomi wasn't just another passenger anymore. She was a problem Celeste could no longer quietly manage. Jared leaned toward her, voice low. "She's running out of moves." Naomi nodded slightly, which means she's about to get desperate. Across the aisle, Laura Everett was still watching, her expression unreadable. A few rows back, a man in a navy blazer had been listening too. Naomi could tell by the way he shifted forward in his seat, eyes flicking between her and Celeste. Celeste remained near the galley, her posture stiff, her fingers tapping against the clipboard she still held. She was thinking, calculating. Then without another word, she stepped into the cockpit. Naomi's stomach tightened. Jared muttered under his breath, "That's not good." No, it wasn't, because Celeste was out of options. and that meant she was about to make a move Naomi couldn't counter. Minutes passed. The plane hummed on, steady in the air, but the energy inside the cabin was far from calm. Naomi kept her gaze on the cockpit door, waiting. And then, a chime overhead. "This is your captain speaking," a voice crackled through the speakers. "We appreciate your cooperation as we ensure the comfort and safety of all passengers. Upon arrival, we ask that a select group of individuals remain seated while our crew coordinates with ground personnel." The words were vague enough to sound routine, but Naomi knew exactly what they meant. Jared's expression darkened. "They're going to have security waiting for you." Naomi gripped the armrests, forcing herself to stay calm. The trap had been set from the moment Celeste stepped onto this plane. Naomi had just played her part by refusing to move to the galley. Now she was officially labeled a concern. She looked at Jared. "You're still recording?" He nodded, lifting his phone slightly. "Everything." A few rows up, Laura Everett's head turned sharply toward Naomi. The uncertainty on her face had shifted into something else. Realization. And then quietly, she unbuckled her seatbelt. Before Naomi could react, Laura stood up. Every eye in first class turned toward her. "I have a question," she said, voice carrying across the cabin. Celeste reappeared from the cockpit, her face carefully blank. "Mrs. Everett, please take your seat." Laura didn't move. "Is there a reason why security has been called for Miss Sinclair?" Silence. Celeste's grip tightened around the clipboard. "I can assure you, this is standard protocol," Laura scoffed. "Is it?" She turned to the other passengers. "Has anyone else on this flight been asked to meet with security upon landing?" Murmurs spread through the cabin. Naomi saw the way people straightened, shifting in their seats, as if suddenly realizing something they hadn't noticed before. Celeste's expression barely flickered, but Naomi saw the way her shoulders tensed. Jared lifted his phone higher. He wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. "Mrs. Everett, please take your seat," Celeste repeated, her voice quieter now. Laura folded her arms. "I think I'd rather stand." Another passenger, the man in the navy blazer, cleared his throat. "I'd like to know too." And just like that, the tide fully turned. Naomi didn't need to fight anymore. The other passengers were doing it for her. Celeste had lost control of the situation. It was written all over her. The normally composed, effortlessly poised flight attendant now looked strained, her grip on the clipboard so tight her knuckles were white. Naomi could see it, the battle between her instincts and her training. Passengers were watching her now, questioning her, something she had never planned for. Jared leaned in toward Naomi, voice low. "She knows this is bad." Naomi exhaled slowly. "Yeah, she does." Laura, still standing, crossed her arms. "So? I'm waiting." Celeste's eyes flicked to the front of the cabin, as if debating whether to call for backup. But she hesitated a second too long, because another passenger stood up, and then another. Jared's phone was pointed directly at Celeste now. "Sit down," she snapped, but it was too late, because she was the one who sounded hostile now. She was the one losing control. And Naomi Sinclair, she had already won. The final 20 minutes of the flight were silent. Celeste disappeared into the galley, not daring to re-emerge. The passengers who had spoken up stayed alert, their expressions unreadable but firm. Naomi kept her breathing steady, her body still, waiting. When the wheels touched down at LAX, the usual rustling of seatbelts clicking open filled the cabin. But no one moved, because they were waiting to see if Celeste would follow through with the threat. A flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. "We ask that all passengers remain seated momentarily while we coordinate with security." Jared muttered a curse. Naomi sat still. And then, a new voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harris. Thank you for your patience. We'd like to welcome you to Los Angeles International Airport. At this time, all passengers are free to disembark as usual. We appreciate your cooperation." Silence. And then, a wave of murmurs. Naomi blinked, processing what had just happened. Jared let out a laugh. They dropped it. They called it off. Naomi turned toward the galley. Celeste was nowhere to be seen, because she had lost. Naomi stepped off the plane, the crisp California air hitting her as she walked toward the terminal. The tension in her body hadn't fully dissipated. But there was something else now, something lighter. Jared walked beside her, phone still in hand. You realize this video is already viral, right? Naomi let out a slow breath. Yeah, I figured. Laura caught up with them, her expression warm but serious. Ms. Sinclair, she said. That was... She shook her head. Unbelievable. Naomi offered a small smile. I appreciate you speaking up. Laura nodded. I just wish I had done it sooner. Jared looked at Naomi. So, what happens now? Naomi didn't hesitate. She had spent her career fighting cases like these, fighting for people who had been targeted, dismissed, silenced. But now she was fighting for herself. We hold them accountable, she said simply, and she meant it. The next morning, Naomi woke to her phone buzzing. Jared's name flashed on the screen. You're everywhere, he said the moment she answered. News outlets are picking up the story. People are demanding answers. Naomi sat up, running a hand over her face. Good, he paused. Silver Horizon Airlines released a statement. Naomi's stomach clenched. Let me guess. Damage control? Exactly. They're claiming this was a miscommunication. Naomi exhaled sharply. Of course they are. Jared's voice was steady. So, you ready to take this all the way? Naomi looked out the window, the sun rising over Los Angeles. A slow smile formed on her lips. Oh, I was born ready. Naomi Sinclair's journey wasn't just about a single flight. It wasn't just about one confrontation with a power-hungry flight attendant. It was about something much bigger. The silent battles that so many people fight every day. How many times have we seen injustice but stayed quiet? How many times have we felt the weight of discrimination but convinced ourselves it wasn't worth the fight? Naomi didn't have the luxury of looking the other way. She knew that every moment of silence allows injustice to grow stronger. Her story is a reminder that change doesn't happen in grand speeches or courtroom victories alone. It happens in the small moments, on a plane, in a workplace, in a conversation where someone chooses to speak up instead of looking away. So ask yourself, if you were on that flight, what would you have done? Would you have been like Jared, quietly documenting the truth? Would you have been like Laura, hesitant at first but willing to step up? Or would you have sat in silence, convincing yourself it wasn't your fight? This isn't just Naomi's story, it's ours. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in her place? Have you ever faced or witnessed something similar? And if you believe in standing up for what's right, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this to tell. Stories that matter, stories that challenge us, and stories that remind us that our voices can change everything. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us for the next journey.